Yesterday, Darren Woodson joined the Stephen A. Smith Show. That's on 1 to 3 daily on Sirius Mad Dog Radio. And they discussed Jimmy Graham. And basically, essentially what he said is that Graham is not a complete teammate and he does not block. Stephen A., can you get into this more in terms of what you and Darren discussed?
Well, I asked him about Jimmy Graham because Jimmy Graham only has about 18 receptions on the year for like 174 yards. The first two games of this season, Skip, as you well know, he wasn't an active participant in the Seahawks offense. And even Pete Carroll came on the record and said, we've got to find a way to get Jimmy more involved. Darren Woodson essentially came on being a football analyst that he is, being a Super Bowl champion, really dissected and analyzed what he saw. And essentially said that he wasn't a teammate. He was a guy out there playing for himself because not necessarily in terms of selfishness, but that he wanted no part of the physicality. It's something that I heard Chris Carter allude to just weeks earlier when he sat there and said, look, Jimmy Graham would block, but let's be real. He doesn't want to block. That's what he said. And obviously, when you play the tight end spot, Skip Bayless, sometimes your responsibility is to help that offensive line ward off oncoming defenders towards the quarterback. You got to block. And that's not Jimmy Graham's strength. So because of that, Darren Woodson highlighted that just like Chris Carter had weeks earlier, except that Darren Woodson obviously sounded a bit more incendiary, to say the least. Just basically said that you're not a teammate. If you're not willing to do what your job description entails, then you're not willing to fulfill your obligations. And if you're not willing to fulfill your obligations, you're not really a teammate. You're not a part of the team. That was the conclusion that Darren Woodson came to. Now, we all know, to at least some degree, Jimmy Graham's background, how a lot of people have been getting on him lately. Outside of Rob Gronkowski, he was considered an elite tight end in the game of football in terms of his talent. We saw him humbled significantly when he went up against the Seattle Seahawks over the past couple of years. So the allure surrounding Mr. Fantasy Superstar himself, Jimmy Graham, sort of dissipated to some degree because we know that the fantasy football lovers just absolutely love him. But then he ultimately gets traded from, New Orleans to Seattle. And you're thinking, well, he's supposed to shine in this particular system. That has not been the case. And so it's been open season on him. Then now you see these stories coming out, talks about his background, talks about foster care, talk about being abandoned by his mom, talk about some of the things that he had to endure. So to call him soft in any way seems sacrilegious and idiotic. But in the end, what it comes down to is this, in my estimation, Skip. The problem with Jimmy Graham is that Jimmy Graham is a tight end that does not view himself as a tight end. Jimmy Graham sees himself as a wide receiver. Remember that beef he had with New Orleans a couple of years back when he was looking for additional dollars. He was saying, I'm not a tight end, I'm a wide out. And I guess it was the arbitrator, whomever it was, had declared that, no, you're a tight end, just like the New Orleans Saints says you are. And so they went from there because he was using it because apparently some money's allocated for particular positions and what have you. So that's what happened with that. But in the end, I think that Jimmy Graham is still a big-time talent. I think he's somebody that could play the game of football very, very well. I think it would behoove Pete Carroll, Darrell Bevell, and the Seattle Seahawks offense led by Russell Wilson to get this man more involved, because the more lethal Jimmy Graham becomes offensively, the more of a problem Seattle's offense is going to cause for opponents. With Beast Mode, Marshawn Lynch, with Lockett and those boys, I think they can make some noise. But obviously, people are down on Jimmy Graham right now, and Darren Woodson is definitely first and foremost on that list.
Yes, he is. Stephen A., as you know, I covered Darren Woodson when he was a Dallas Cowboy. He was as tough a safety as I've ever been around in my many years covering pro football. So I get where his heart is on this matter. He's basically saying, I wouldn't want that guy in my locker room on my team because I don't like the contribution that he's bringing. He's not giving what a football player needs to give at that position. And I don't want to be too hard on Darren, but you're right. There's an identity crisis here going on with Jimmy Graham because he does not consider himself playing that position. He doesn't think he was more basketball player than football player. He played all 4 years of basketball, only 1 year of football. So he's a little bit of a fish from Miami out of water in the NFL in that I don't think he ever wanted to block anybody. He's not into high contact. He's not a Darren Woodson. He's not built that way. And so I asked all the analysts, what did you expect of him? Because you made the point, Stephen A., as they went through arbitration. The stats showed from last season in New Orleans that Jimmy Graham lined up as an inline tight end only 33% of the time. That meant that he lined up in line 291 times. All the other times he was in the slot or split completely out wide, 486 times. So I thought he had a good case that he's much more hybrid wide receiver than he is pure tight end. So when he got to Seattle, you and I talked about, man, how are Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, all the rest in the Legion of Boom, how are they going to accept this? Now, do they resent him? I don't know. I don't have any idea. But he's so far having a hard time fitting into the Seattle offense, and it may be a little bit because there's some resentment that he doesn't do the dirty work, as Darren Woodson said. But I don't think he's capable. I don't think he's built to do the dirty work. I think they just have to accept him for what he is and isn't.
Well, I think they have to remember the number one reason they brought him to Seattle. Bottom line is they didn't bring him to Seattle to block. I understand that's part of his responsibility, but they didn't bring him to Seattle for that. They brought him to Seattle to catch the football. They brought him to Seattle to be their version and the NFC's version of Rob Gronkowski, because we all know as it goes for tight ends, he may be the closest thing to Rob Gronkowski out there in terms of route running and catching the football from the tight end slot. If they utilize him effectively, none of this is an issue. I promise you, the Legion of Boom is going to look at him and his ability to elevate Seattle's offense, and they will gravitate to him in a heartbeat. But you don't ask a guy like that to block that much. I don't care what anybody says. You just don't do it. Because not only does he not want to, but he's not built for it, okay? He's a big boy, but he's not big and rugged like Rob Gronkowski. He's just tall and athletic. There's a difference. And when you have somebody like that, you've got brawlers and you've got boxers. He's a boxer. He's a finesse guy. He's gifted in skill.
I agree.
There's no rough and ruggedness to him. He might be internally stronger than they're giving him credit for, but he's not a rough and rugged kind of player. He's more finesse and skilled. And when you know that, you can't put him in a position where you're asking him to be Rough Riders. I do understand, though, where it's coming from. Remember what I told you Cam Chancellor and the Legion of Boom told me a couple of years back? We teach everyone here to attack your fears. Whatever you fear, go out there and do it, because we don't want you doing it. I don't think it's a matter of Jimmy Graham being fearful. I think it's a matter of him feeling like he's not productive unless he's catching the football and making things happen as opposed to blocking. That's part of his problem.
Okay.
So somebody's going to have to get into his head and modify his mindset to some degree, but at the same time, they're going to have to learn to appreciate the gifts that he brings to the table, because they didn't have it before he arrived. That's why they went out there and got him.
Okay, so Stephen A., this is your other Super Bowl team, the Seahawks. They going to win at Cincinnati Sunday?
I believe they will. Their
Easily?
offense is giving me live, and they'll show up for this game. Cincinnati's very good. They're very gifted. You know, I have no faith in them in the postseason, but I think they're legit in the regular season. But they're not going to go undefeated. I think they're right to be had. I think that defense is big time, but I think Russell Wilson could do some things against them, and I think the Legion of Boom is going to rattle Andy Dalton. I think as pretty and as nice as he has looked throwing the football, I think he's going to be made to be very, very uncomfortable this coming Sunday.
Give me a score.
I'm going to say Seattle 22, Cincinnati 20.
Really? Okay, so you at least have it close.
It's going to be close.
I completely disagree with your take. I believe that your Seahawks stole a game on Monday night, short turnaround on the road to Cincinnati. They were very lucky to get out with their, 2-2 life after Monday night. Should be 1-3 going to Cincinnati. We both agreed that we didn't love some of the things we saw offensively. Russell Wilson turned the ball over a couple times. Then the defense giving up a near 91-yard touchdown drive, nearly to end the game. Not a great sign. Cam Chancellor still trying to sort of find his way back into the Legion of Boom. Obviously, slightly rusty here and there, though he made a great play that looked like it had saved the game until the bat out of hell play occurred. So I'm going to go with Cincinnati here because I'm starting to believe in the Bengals. I did not even have them in the playoffs, but my eye test is telling me they have a different level of self-confidence this year than I've seen in the past. Last few years, they have roller coastered all the way through the year, and maybe they still will. Maybe this will be the start of a decline. But I like the way Andy Dalton is carrying himself. He seems to be playing with a much higher level of self-confidence than I've seen in the past. So after what they did, just obliterating the Raiders on opening day at Oakland, they went and won at Baltimore. I'm going to go with them. I got a close score, too. I got 21-17 Bengals over your Seahawks.
Well, I'm going to tell you this much. Andy Dalton has looked incredibly impressive. He's completed 67% of his passes. He's only thrown 1 interception on the season and 9 touchdowns. You know, his QBR is at 87, which is really, really great. It's better than most quarterbacks in the league, if not all of them. And then when I look at Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill, I give a lot of credit where credit is due. And, of course, A.J. Green is one of the top 5 receivers in the game of football. And this defense is no joke either. But I do believe, Skip Bayless, that it may very well be too good to be true. Andy Dalton, in my opinion, can't continue to play this way. I could be wrong, but I don't believe it. What I would say is this. I want to give Marvin Lewis, who obviously I've called out on many occasions, I want to give him credit and be fair to him for the outstanding job that he's doing thus far. I also want to take a moment to give major props to Hugh Jackson, an individual who should have never been let go by Reggie McKenzie as head coach for the Oakland Raiders, who's now the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati, who I think is doing an outstanding job in terms of reshaping the makeup, the mental makeup of the Cincinnati Bengals, particularly, obviously, on the offensive side of the ball. They're coming after people, and I haven't seen them do that like this in all the years that Marvin Lewis has been there. So I'm going to give Hugh Jackson a lot of credit for what we're seeing from Andy Dalton and the rest of that offense now. Not because of their abilities, but also because of their mindset. They are coming after it. They are constantly on the offensive. And I like that mentality.
Agreed. Stephen A. has Seattle, Skip has Cincy, both expecting a close one. Jimmy Graham, obviously a highly talented weapon, yet to fin with his new team. This situation personally reminds me a lot of DeMarco in Philly.